The blood had barely dried on the palace steps when Mengistu Haile Mariam raised 3 bottles filled with dark red liquid before the crowd assembled in Addis Ababa's Revolution Square. "This is the blood of the reactionaries and imperialists I have crushed," he proclaimed, smashing each bottle to the ground as the crowd roared. It was 1977, and Ethiopia's new strongman had just publicly displayed what many claimed was the actual blood of Emperor Haile Selassie and his ministers. Whether theatrical prop or genuine human remains, the message was clear. The old Ethiopia was dead, and a new, terrible power had risen. The man who would become known as the Butcher of Addis Ababa began life far from the corridors of power. Born to a servant mother and an army officer father who never acknowledged him, Mengistu grew up with the bitter taste of rejection and social invisibility. The humiliation of his illegitimacy burned within him, cultivating what psychohistorians would later identify as a profound sense of inadequacy masked by ruthless ambition. His childhood in Addis Ababa's impoverished outskirts taught him that power belonged to those willing to seize it without remorse. He carried his illegitimacy like an open wound, wrote biographer Andagachio Tirune, and throughout his life he sought validation through dominance. The young Mengistu found his path to power through the military, joining Ethiopia's armed forces, where his tactical mind and fierce determination earned him advancement despite his modest education. Yet even as he rose through the ranks, the shadow of his origins haunted him. Fellow officers from aristocratic backgrounds treated him with thinly veiled contempt, feeding a resentment that would later explode into revolutionary violence. The imperial Ethiopia of Haile Selassie existed as a medieval kingdom awkwardly draped in 20th century trappings. While the elderly emperor dined from golden plates, peasants starved in their thousands during the devastating famine of 1973. The emperor's response, denial and indifference, provided the kindling for revolution. When asked about his reaction to the famine, Selassie reportedly said, "Rich and poor have always existed and always will. Why? Because there are those who work and those who prefer to do nothing." Such callousness from a man who fed his palace dog's meat while children perished ignited rage across the nation. For Mengistu, the revolution that overthrew Selassie in 1974 represented more than political change. It was personal vindication. As a member of the Derg, the military committee that seized power, he initially operated from the shadows. In those early days, he was quiet, almost withdrawn, recalled fellow officer Fikra Selassie Vogdares. But there was something in his eyes that frightened me, a coldness that seemed to calculate everyone's usefulness or threat. That calculation soon manifested in action. When moderate members of the Derg favored gradual reform, Mengistu orchestrated their elimination. On November 23, 1974, he personally executed General Aman Andom, the Derg's chairman, along with 59 former officials of the imperial government. Witnesses reported that Mengistu fired the first shots himself, his face revealing neither anger nor remorse, just the focused concentration of a man removing obstacles. By 1977, through cunning manipulation and outright violence, Mengistu had consolidated his position as Ethiopia's absolute ruler. He declared himself a Marxist and aligned the country with the Soviet Union, though his true ideology was power itself. In private, according to his former aide Dawit Shifar, Mengistu often expressed contempt for communist ideologues. "Theories won't feed our people or build our nation," he would say. "Only strength matters in Africa." The Ethiopia that Mengistu sought to create through his Red Terror campaign existed first in his imagination, a modernized, industrialized nation that would earn international respect and validate his leadership. Yet the methods he chose to pursue this vision revealed the darkness at his core. When student activists questioned his commitment to true revolution, his response was swift and horrific. "The revolution needs to clear the air with its spears," he announced in a chilling speech that launched the Red Terror. "We will not spare the counter-revolutionaries. We will kill them without mercy." Death squads roamed Addis Ababa and other cities, executing suspected opponents and leaving their bodies on street corners as warnings. Parents were charged for the bullets used to kill their children before they could claim the bodies. In the eerie quiet of his office at night, with Addis Ababa spread below his window, Mengistu would sip whiskey and listen to classical music, particularly Wagner, a preference that disturbed his Soviet advisors. The contradiction bothered them, noted Russian diplomat Vladimir Kazimierov. Here was a man implementing radical socialist policies while embracing the tastes of European aristocracy. They failed to understand that for Mengistu, socialism was merely a tool for power, not a matter of conviction. His paranoia grew with his power. The presidential palace became a labyrinth of security measures. He never slept in the same bedroom 2 nights in succession and employed multiple food tasters. According to his personal physician, Dr. Azrat Woldais, Mengistu suffered from chronic insomnia and debilitating migraines, physical manifestations of his psychological torment. He lived in constant fear of betrayal, Woldais observed. Every shadow contained an assassin, every whisper a plot. This paranoia fueled increasingly irrational decisions. When drought again struck Ethiopia in the mid-1980s, Mengistu diverted international aid to fund military campaigns against separatist movements in Eritrea and Tigray. He spent $200 million on celebrations for the 10th anniversary of the revolution, while hundreds of thousands of his people starved to death. The famine that killed an estimated 1 million Ethiopians became, in Mengistu's distorted worldview, an international conspiracy to undermine his regime. "We see famine as a weapon," he told his cabinet in a closed meeting recorded by his former secretary. "The imperialists use it to turn our people against us. We must control the narrative." This control included forced resettlement programs that displaced 600,000 people from drought-affected northern highlands to the malarial lowlands, where many died from disease and hunger. The bitter irony of Mengistu's rule was that his obsession with creating a strong, independent Ethiopia ultimately left the country weaker and more dependent than ever. Under his leadership, Ethiopia became one of Africa's poorest nations, reliant on Soviet military aid and international food assistance. The man who had promised national pride delivered national humiliation. As rebel forces advanced on Addis Ababa in May 1991, Mengistu's courage finally failed him. The leader who had executed so many for perceived cowardice fled the country under cover of darkness, seeking asylum in Zimbabwe. His final communication to the Ethiopian people was not an admission of failure or an expression of remorse, but a defiant justification. "History will absolve me," he declared, echoing Fidel Castro's famous phrase. Today, at 85, Mengistu Haile Mariam lives in comfortable exile in Harare, protected by Robert Mugabe's successor and reportedly advising governments on counterinsurgency tactics. Ethiopia sentenced him to death in absentia for genocide in 2007, but justice remains elusive. In rare interviews, he expresses no regret for the estimated 500,000 deaths attributed to his regime. "Revolutionary change requires sacrifice," he told a Zimbabwean journalist in 2008. "I did what was necessary for Ethiopia." Dawit Voldajorgis, who served as Mengistu's Relief and Rehabilitation Commissioner before defecting to the United States, offers perhaps the most haunting assessment of his former leader. In his mind, Mengistu truly believed he was Ethiopia's savior. This conviction allowed him to justify any atrocity as necessary for the greater good. The tragedy is that he still doesn't understand that he became the very thing he claimed to fight against, a tyrant disconnected from the suffering of ordinary people. In Ethiopia today, the physical reminders of Mengistu's rule have largely been erased. The Soviet-style monuments have been dismantled, the propaganda murals painted over. But for millions of Ethiopians, the psychological scars remain. Families still searching for the disappeared, survivors still waking from nightmares of torture cells beneath the Grand Palace. And somewhere in Harare, an old man watches the sunset, perhaps still hearing the cheers of the crowd as he smashed those bottles of blood on the palace steps, still believing that his name will one day be spoken with reverence rather than horror. The final tragedy of Mengistu Haile Mariam may be that in the cold prison of his own making, he remains forever incapable of seeing the monster reflected in history's unforgiving mirror.